So hello there guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 Podcast. I hope that you guys are okay and doing well as always. F1 coming to the final few chapters of the 2022 season. We already have the Drivers' World Champion in Max Verstappen and the Constructors' Championship all sealed up with Red Bull. We've already been through the cost cap and the punishments in the last episode, so don't worry guys, if you don't want us to be talking about that too much, we're not going to be doing that. We might throw in the occasional little jibe or little joke here or there or comment based on what's gone down with the cost cap. But of course, we're going to be focusing on the Brazilian Grand Prix and also F1's final sprint race for 2023, which of course we'll be talking about that and plenty other topics for your listening or viewing pleasure. If you want to support us, as always, you can do so via YouTube. You can like the video and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you listen to us on your favorite audio podcasting platform, you can support us by giving us a 5-star review if you think that we are worthy of one. And if you do, we'll give you a shout out on the next episode of the show. Joining me on the show, as always, is the regular DNF1 panel. We have Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington. Lads, first of all, how are we doing? Courtney, let's start with you. You're in a good mood at the moment. How's things?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I've just had a bit of a nothing day today, so I've just been praying to my Lewis Hamilton statue that I've got in my room. I always, praise, the one and only Lewis Hamilton. I've no time for any other teams or drivers. Just putting it out there, just Lewis Hamilton, nothing else. Then I've just been crying about Abu Dhabi and the cost cap breach. That's what I spent my entire day doing.
I like that there. So you're sort of wavering away the Red Bull fans or the Max Verstappen fans to sort of ignore this show, and then you've brought them back just to remind them you're still crying about Abu Dhabi. I like that. I like this. If they haven't if they haven't closed their browser or closed their podcasting platform after you said that, they might still be hanging around. So we'll have to see how that one goes. Lee, how are you doing? Are you less nostalgic about last season? Are you more focused on this weekend rather than looking back?
Oh, the only bit I'm nostalgic from last season is the racing, but that's a whole different discussion.
Salty Mercedes fan.
No, nothing about that. No, I just want some close racing. Come on, Ferrari, come on, Mercedes, come on, Alpine, McLaren. Let's see if we can upset the Red Bull order. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to another season in Interlagos. Or not season, another race in Interlagos. Those lovely curveballs, some bit of rain, a bit of crashing, a bit of safety car. Come on, let's get some juicier weekend.
A bit of FIA great management.
Oh God! No! That ruins the weekend.
Let's not get greedy now. I mean, we can't have everything on. But no, you mentioned a good point, Lee. The wet weather is obviously going to be a factor this week. And I was looking at the weather forecast, and just to break it down for everyone, obviously, because it's a sprint weekend, we're going to be having sprint qualifying on the Friday afternoon. We're going to have the sprint race on Saturday. We're going to have the main race on the Sunday, which we don't have to explain the ramifications of how a sprint weekend works. I'm sure most of our F1 following that tunes into the show know all about sprint weekends and how they sort of broken down. But the weather is going to be atrocious. I think it's very likely at this point we're going to be seeing a wet weather race. But I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. In the past, we've watched F1 for a long time now, and in the past, we'd always look forward to wet weather with a plum of excitement, and, with that comes that spontaneity, that risk element, also the anything can happen factor, the X factor, if you like, for a Grand Prix weekend. These days, wet weather is a little bit more...
Cancel the event. No, that's it. Let's go.
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. In a nutshell. I mean, it's nuts. I mean, we can talk about this topic already, but it's something that we've gone over so many times. And I feel like if F1 are going to, or the FIA are going to improve the show next season, they have to be able, with Pirelli, of course, to produce tyres that are just suitable for the wet conditions. I mean...
Oh, no. What you mean, Adam, is the Pirelli's new range of wet tyres for next season, they don't exist. Saves money.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they need to produce tyres, wet tyres, nonetheless.
They don't go racing in the rain.
Well, no, that's my point. They need to produce wet tyres that can handle racing in the wet. I mean, that's the point of them?
No, that's a waste of money in development. They don't get used. Budget cap, blah blah blah. It's not waste of money. That's just a race in nice sunny, dry conditions.
Well, I like to think of wet tyres as like avocados, really. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of avocados, as controversial as that may seem to some people, but they're so
That's because
bad.
you're working class, Adam.
Well, I mean, each to their own on that one, but I'm not sure my better half would probably agree with you on that one in that regard. She might have a few things to say, but no, when it comes to what I mean is like with avocados, you know how they are. When you buy them, they're not quite ready to eat. They have to ripen, but there's a very finite window where they become ripe to eat and then they go off and you can't eat them.
5 seconds.
Yeah, it's literally the 5-second rule, but you apply that with when it's suitable to eat. By the time that you started making guacamole, by the time you finish making guacamole, the avocados are out of date and you have to throw them away. But yeah, I feel like F1 wet tyres are like that. Like you get to a point where it gets it's so wet that the intermediates are no longer suitable. The wet tyres come on, the session either gets red flagged or the wet tyres just don't work. They just burn up too quickly and you have to put the inters back on, but it's too wet for the inters. So we're going to see a lot of that this weekend. It's going to be an opportunity for some drivers to perhaps to make up some places that they may have struggled to do so in dry conditions. We always remember that brilliant performance from Max Verstappen in the wet in 2016 it was.
Yeah, 360 spin. Oof.
He loves doing that though, doesn't he? He loves
keep it out of the wall.
He's the only driver I know that loves a 360 spin and he wins a Grand Prix. I think he's done it this season in Hungary where he did it. He did it in Germany back in, 2019 in Germany? When was Mercedes when that anniversary where they had that terrible...
Yeah, that was
it 2019?
2019, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking because I think Vettel, he came from back of the grid and he finished second in the Ferrari on that day as well. That's why I remember it for mostly. But yeah, Max, he loves a 360 spin and then goes on and delivers a masterclass in the wet. So maybe we'll see that again this weekend. It might be interesting. I do want to move on, guys, and talk about the sprint series this weekend. It's the final sprint race of the season. Shout out to Greg, who was listening to our F1 news special with George Morgan last week. Of course, if you haven't checked that out, definitely check that out. It was a really, really good discussion with him. And we were talking about when the last sprint race was, and Greg kindly pointed it out to us that it was back in Austria in July. That long ago. I mean, granted, we've only got 3 sprint weekends this season. Next season, they're pushing to have more sprint races. But I guess what I want to talk about, guys, is how you feel about sprint races in 2022. They were introduced in 2021. Some mixed reviews. Some thought that they were good. Some thought they were just a little bit boring. We did have a few highlight moments, particularly in Brazil, with Sir Lewis Hamilton starting from the back of the grid. We're not going to talk about why he started at the back of the grid because that's a very contentious topic for another day when it comes to fine margins. But he put together a fantastic performance coming from the back all the way, I think it was to P5 or P4 or something like that. And I think a lot of people probably hailed sprint races rather than looking at the fact that because we had Sir Lewis at the back, he made the sprint race more exciting than it probably should have been. This season, I can't really say from the top of my head that I have too many memories of key moments in sprint races. I think the only highlight of the sprint races this season was in Imola when Leclerc got ahead of Verstappen early on and it was a bit of a cat and mouse chase between them, which eventually Max Verstappen won out on. But other than that, I can't really remember any other significant highlights for sprint races. So I suppose going into next season, with the sprint races being doubled to 6 races, the venues of which haven't been confirmed, and I bet a lot of money that Brazil will be one of them. What do you guys make of sprint races? Have you enjoyed them this season? Do you feel that they just need a little bit more tweaking, or do you feel that they should just bin them off? Because there is a mixed view on that right now.
Yeah, I think they definitely do with a tweak. I think there's always room to finesse the race weekend. But I think for me personally, even if they were to tweak the sprint races and they were to improve to a degree, I still wouldn't like them to be on every single race weekend. Like I do like the traditional setup where you have to qualify on a Saturday, then a race on a Sunday. So I think having a combination of both race weekend formats would actually be refreshing for the calendar. So I do think, even if they do improve the aspect of the sprint races, I do think we should be keeping the 2 formats moving forward.
Yeah. Well, Sir Lewis would agree with that. I think he was reached for a comment on this, and he was basically saying along the lines of that, the sprint races are okay. There's something different. It's something new, so that we should try and pursue this and go forward. Max Verstappen was on the other end of this. He wasn't a fan of it at all. He thinks F1 should just stick to the main race, and that he doesn't understand why there's a problem with just that. He said they've had a lot of exciting races this year and you don't need to add an extra third distance to get anything more. And to be fair to him, with the exception of Mexico, he's probably right. You know, there have been a lot of exciting races this year, a lot of good races. Okay, a lot of them have been won by him. So, you know, in terms of the randomness of that, that's not really been there. But I'm kind of inclined to agree with him. I mean, I know it's better than just watching qualifying all the time, or better than watching free practice. But quite frankly, sometimes an extra third race distance for the sake of it doesn't really create much because there's too much jeopardy on the line for someone that gets it wrong. And we saw that a lot in 2021. I think people have been more cautious this year.
Yeah, I personally think they're better than last year. But the Lewis and Max spectrum on the sprint races, I probably agree with Max over Lewis than the idea of having them. My suggestion to spice it up would be you only have sprint races with their junior drivers. There you go. They have a separate junior driver championship on sprint weekends. Yeah, something different.
Yeah,
you get the car
that would
action,
be fun.
But you get some different drivers to get experience.
That would be fun.
You give Daniel Ricciardo a chance, wouldn't it?
Oh, God. No, this is it, because you'll chuck in everybody's reserve drivers and then Danny Rick will absolutely wipe the floor of everybody. Well, I'd assume he would. And again, you know, it's just from the experience factor, but I'm not sure how I feel about sprint races. I've not really been a fan of them too much. I know it's a little bit of extra racing. I just think for the last 2 years, we've other than obvious scenarios where people have had to recover positions that have been in a much faster car and they've been able to do that quite easily. I feel like sprint races are just mostly about the drivers making sure they don't damage their cars, try and have a bit of an early fight for a few positions to improve their qualifying position on Sunday. But then you get into a rhythm and you get to a point where everyone just sort of manages their car, manages their tyres and make sure they don't do anything stupid, really. And ultimately, I think that is the problem with sprint races. I like your idea, Lee, where you can have all the reserve drivers or young drivers in these cars, but the problem to have their own little mini championship to entertain the crowd. But the problem with that is who's going to pay the bill for these cars? Because ideally, you would, for example, you wouldn't want Max Verstappen in his Red Bull.
We got back to the cost cap. Oh, terrible.
I tried so hard to avoid it, but you brought me right back in on that one. But I mean, in all seriousness, though, who's going to pay for these cars? Because you don't want, so like I said, Max Verstappen, you don't want his car being used by a Red Bull junior driver, whoever that may be, and they go and absolutely pummel it into the wall. And then
that's where you use Sergio's car.
Well, Red Bull probably would, but then in all fairness to them, I wouldn't blame them for doing that. But the same problem, kind of lends itself to this issue now where F1 are trying to push sprint races, and I'm not quite sure how to really resolve this. I don't like the idea of reverse grids. I think that solves nothing, especially in this era of racing. I don't think you're going to get what you'd think would happen. And who's going to foot the bill for it, really?
The FIA won't.
I'm going to avoid the FIA rant because I feel I have one every single episode. But no, I'll make it right, because if you are going to, if you were to go on with that kind of idea that you mentioned, Lee, you would have to throw the financial limitations out the window completely, because they're reserved enough as it is in these races. I suppose another solution would be to give more points, even though they've already done that compared to last season. It's all about risk and reward, isn't it? So I think that's the main thing that they'd have to, the organisers would have to think about, is balancing out the risk and reward aspect for even more in order to make the sprint races more entertaining.
Or you do Bernie's idea of double points.
And
50 points system for the race win.
Well, just the sprint. It makes the main event. It makes the main event become irrelevant now. We're just going to win the sprint race. Ferrari might do well. If their tyre wear's terrible, they'll just try and win all the sprint races. But no, that'd be interesting. No, but let us know your thoughts, guys, on sprint races. I know we've asked this a few times now, but as we come into the final sprint race of 2022, what have you thought of them this season? And given that we're going to be doubling the amount next season, do you want to see more sprint races, or would you rather us just go back to focusing on the main races? I mean, one thing we can all agree on is that it's better to watch them race each other in a live situation than watching an FP3 session or FP1 or something like that where... But, you got to find a compromise. But I don't see this going away anytime soon. I think F1 are just going to keep on hammering and pushing this until they find something that works and then just run with that, quite literally. Next thing I want to talk about Mercedes. Can we talk about Mercedes?
Sure.
Great.
Are we allowed to?
I think we're allowed to.
Without being called fanboys?
Well, you two respectively, yeah, maybe. But I think we'll do our best to keep our biases in check nonetheless. I mean, it's all good fun and all good jest. Mercedes, one thing I do want to talk about is a lot of talk has been made on them this season for their car, in particular, the W13, that it's not been as good as its predecessors. Given that this was a new set of regulations, perhaps expectations were a little bit higher, that they would be at the very least in the championship fight or win a couple of races. We've gone to Mexico. We all said and we all thought that Mexico was going to be the race where we thought Mercedes would not only challenge for a victory, but have a very good chance of getting on the top step. And given the form of Sir Lewis Hamilton recently, you would probably argue that he looks ready and driving brilliantly. And you think the only reason why he hasn't won a race this year is because of Max Verstappen. I think 4 times Lewis has come second. Max has won all of those races. So you feel like it's inevitable, hopefully, be in a situation where they could. As it were, it turns out Mercedes were arguably probably nowhere near Red Bull in truth, or Max. I mean, that 44 medium stint from Max Verstappen was absolutely incredible. Every single lap, bar 2 behind the virtual safety car, were in the 122s. I mean, that's phenomenal consistency. I keep seeing tweets on social media saying that Max is still doing that medium stint around Mexico right now and the tyres haven't gone off yet. But this is kind of where I want to hammer in on Mercedes right now, and that's their strategy. Something that they cannot fix with new car parts for 2023. You know, we focus so much on the car, we've almost kind of ignored, or perhaps for the first time, we've been able to see Mercedes in a situation where they have to have a good strategy to maximise their results. And they've had opportunities this season where they've made calls on strategy, or like the Dutch Grand Prix, for example, that's a good prime example of that. Not so much Italian Grand Prix, French Grand Prix you can argue to a degree as well. Hungary, another example where things didn't go quite right for them ultimately, and they did get a good result, but they could have had a bit more. In Mexico, there was all that deliberation between Hamilton and Russell and Mercedes over tyre strategy. They thought that starting on the softs would be the best way to go. As it were, Ferrari and Red Bull disagreed with them, and you could argue that if Ferrari, their car they were able to run it at full speed, they may have been challenging Mercedes for that second position as well. So I guess my question is, guys, on this one, what do we think about Mercedes on strategy? Because when I was looking into this, I have to say, I think we've kind of overrated them a little bit by comparing them to Red Bull in that regard. What's your thoughts?
I do think there's been a sense of desperation about, say, these strategic calls this season. You know, they know they're far behind. So whenever they feel like they're within a sniff of a win, like we saw in Mexico, I just think they were just so desperate to potentially get the win that they were almost too conservative with their strategy, which actually cost them, because at the beginning of the race, they were staying with Red Bull. And, you know, it looked like the strategy was swinging in Mercedes' favour. And then, obviously, after they sort of went with too much of a conservative approach, that's when the pendulum swung in Red Bull's favour. Even though I do feel that Red Bull still had the pace advantage, they clearly cast their class of their own in 2022. But I'm not saying by all means Mercedes are perfect, but I do think that an element of desperation has come into their strategy calls this season because the car has been so bad.
Yeah, that is true. And I think it's easy sometimes to overlook this issue. But one thing I do want to focus on, something that you mentioned there, Courtney, Mercedes being too conservative. And I think we saw this in Mexico. You know, Mercedes were going on the softs. They obviously planned to go the hards and go for the one stop. The plan seemed to be that if they could the mediums, I should probably swap this around, like Ferrari and Red Bull went on softs, Mercedes went on mediums, before someone points it out to me. Mercedes wanted to go on those mediums. The plan seemed to be that they were going to go on them for a long time and perhaps put on the softs towards the end and chase after Red Bull and overtake them, expecting Red Bull to not make the mediums last. And obviously when Red Bull went for that stop, they obviously changed, you know, they went onto the hards to go to, mediums to go to the end from the soft tyres. And all the while, Mercedes were just waiting and waiting and waiting when George Russell and Sir Lewis Hamilton clearly pointed them out over and over again that these tyres aren't working for them. They're struggling to get them up to temperature. They need to change their strategy, and they refuse to. And then you've got drivers like Daniel Ricciardo, who did do that, went onto the soft tyres, and he was absolutely gunning it. Who's to say, if Mercedes hadn't put the soft tyre on, after their medium stint, if they'd gone longer, perhaps they could have caught Red Bull and beaten them this week. Well, we'll never know, but it does seem to me that they were so conservative on strategy, and perhaps this is something that we need to concentrate on with Mercedes. Are they now too conservative to a point where if they're in this position next year where they're trying to fight for a championship, that strategy they're going to have to improve to be better?
Yeah, well, I'll add on the strategy thing, even outside of this year into previous years, when Ferrari, not Ferrari, sorry, getting on them blaming the wrong team. When Mercedes are put under pressure strategy-wise, and I mean put under a proper pressure that they have to deviate from their plan, Mercedes always seem to buckle. They're not very good at making it up on the go as Red Bull. However, Mercedes are better at building a better overall plan than Ferrari, who seem to have very little quality to their plans, just have a lot of them. Obviously, all the teams have a lot of their plans. Isn't it? Yeah.
Well, they just go at it and think, well, one of them's bound to work. We'll just throw every letter of the alphabet that we know. I mean, we're going to start seeing Ferrari make up random letters or just go AB or AC or AD, but like an Excel spreadsheet of all the different Ferrari plans.
None of them start communicating with Braille.
Oh, God. I wouldn't recommend using that in a Formula One car. No. That'd be a bit awkward.
But I definitely think Mercedes are very slow to react when they have to deviate from their plan, and that's the problem they've had since Mercedes joined the sport, in my opinion.
I think they've always had this issue. I think we've just completely overlooked it and ignored it because of how good the car has been and the drivers as well with that. And that most of the time when they're dealing with strategy, I mean, I think the only time I would say Mercedes were good on strategy was when Hamilton and Rosberg were fighting each other. And they had to be. They split the garage to such a point where they had to be good on strategy for each of their drivers, to the point where they had to manage engine mapping just to make sure that their drivers were using the same, because there was always accusations that, Nico got this or Lewis got that. And that's the only time I think throughout this turbo hybrid era where Mercedes have actually been nailed on the strategy, and they were fighting amongst themselves because, that's how it was. Now that they're in this fight, trying to seize opportunities when they come, in a position they've never really been in before, for a long time now, they do tend to be very conservative. They're very reluctant to alter their strategy if different situations change.
Can I add on as well? I forgot to mention earlier that I think they're limited with strategy. Adding on to the point I made about the performance of the car, because the car is so draggy when it comes to the engine performance in comparison to Red Bull that clearly have the best straight line speed. That does limit their strategic options, because it would have been a lot more difficult for the Mercedes to overtake the Red Bull compared to them being able to defend against the Red Bull, even though it was obviously Red Bull had the advantage anyway. But they probably went the conservative approach, thinking that they're not going to be able to overtake the Red Bull even with the faster tyre, because they have such a lack of confidence in their straight line speed.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's a really, really good point. It's something ultimately that we may not see so much in Brazil, but there could be a strategy element to this if weather conditions change, if we get a lot of rain, that sort of window between intermediates and wet tyres. We saw a lot of this in Japan, and teams that went wrong on that, most notably Haas and Mick Schumacher, threw away a lot of positions doing that. It could provide an opportunity for Mercedes to get a result. Bear in mind, this is a team that is, staring perilously close to not winning a Grand Prix this season. I think their best chance has gone already. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see. Something that Sir Lewis Hamilton will be thinking about, because he's never gone a full season without winning a Grand Prix. In fact, this is his longest winless run of his entire career. So, I mean...
Max does well in Brazil as well. Max is particularly strong in Brazil. I expect complete Max dominance this weekend.
Yeah, me too. We'll get to the predictions obviously later on, but I think Mercedes, if they do have a chance this weekend, they're going to have to be bold on strategy. I mean, when you think about it, you could argue that Red Bull is probably the only team that has been uber aggressive on strategy and changed outcomes of races in their favour more often than not by doing stuff like this. I've not really seen any other team do that for a long time, so perhaps it's because Red Bull have raised the bar so much, and this modern era of F1 lends itself to not seeing too much innovation on strategy. I mean, you're never going to see a scenario where, for example, like we saw last year, where we saw Mercedes and Red Bull changing to two-stop strategies, surrendering track position, and both Sir Lewis and Max hunting down the other and then taking the lead towards the end of the race, as they've done. You haven't really seen much of that this year. So, food for thought. Let us know, guys, what you think. Are Mercedes too conservative on strategy? We all seem to be in agreement that they are, and perhaps it's something they need to work on in 2023. It's not always about the car, although in fairness to Mercedes, this season it has been quite a undertaking for them to get back on level terms, which they're not quite there yet, but they are getting closer. Quick note on Verstappen and Red Bull. Obviously, now we've moved on from the cost cap scenario. They've had their punishment. They're not losing their championships. They are going to be hindered in 2023. We went over this in more detail in the last episode if you want to check out that discussion. We're not going to talk about that too much here. We're going to talk about something a bit more positive for Max Verstappen. He's already now the most successful driver in terms of race wins in a single season. He's got that 14th Grand Prix win. He's also chasing, I believe, it's not quite the all-time percentage of wins record for a driver. He's now behind Jim Clark and Michael Schumacher and Alberto Ascari, although I don't think he can catch Ascari because Ascari only had 8 races in a season. He won 6 out of the 8, so it's not really a fair comparison, but he can finish the season with 72.7% of all races won. And these are the main races, not including the sprint races, although Max has won those too as well, if you like. So for Max Verstappen, can you see a scenario where Max doesn't overtake Michael and Jim Clark in that regard and obviously have a better ratio of wins this season?
Yeah, no, I think he'll win both of the remaining races. And look, I've been very vocal about the Red Bull situation over the last couple of seasons. But if we're reflecting on Max's performances, they've certainly improved this season. I think he learned a lot from last season. I think it really, despite the drama that came with it, I think he learned a lot from it. And I also think, despite Charles Leclerc having, the majority of the joy on a Saturday, I think Max Verstappen's qualifying performances have improved greatly, which have obviously, helped him in great stead, particularly having an advantage over Sergio Perez. Because obviously with Red Bull having the fastest car, the closest rival he has is Sergio. And Sergio's qualifying pace hasn't really been there, nowhere compared to Max. That's where I think the biggest change in Max's game in terms of improvement has come from the qualifying performance in particular. I think the race performance, starting from the front, that's been there for years. Even since he was young, he was able to dominate races once he got the lead. But the qualifying performance, always thought that in recent seasons, that was probably Max's biggest weakness. But he's certainly improved that, and it's become more noticeable in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, when Red Bull have developed this car quite emphatically to the point where it can now, on outright one-lap pace, get pole positions, and arguably is the favourite for qualifying as well. Ferrari seem to have surrendered that advantage. And in Max Verstappen, we're talking about a guy now that a few years ago, we were talking about a guy that would win the occasional race, that would put the pressure on the Mercedes duo and sometimes would get the result, but he'd absolutely go hell for leather to try and achieve that. He was either going to win the race or he was going to burn out his tyres and try to lumber home in third, or at the very least fend off the Ferraris if they had a late charge at him because he was trying to go after Mercedes. We often said this was a guy that once he's got the car underneath him, once he's got a championship or two under his belt, which he does now have, he is going to be a formidable force to be reckoned with. And the level that he's driving right now, I mean, we watched that Mexican race. There was always that element of jeopardy over whether or not he would win the Grand Prix, purely and simply because we had Sir Lewis Hamilton driving phenomenally well in a Mercedes that looked like it was going to be competitive. And strategy-wise, perhaps it kind of overshadowed the performance of Mercedes a little bit and undermined them. But even then, there was an element of control in Max. And when you look through the timing sheets, I already mentioned that 44-lap medium stint where we all were thinking, when are the mediums going to come off? And they never really did.
That pace to spare.
It's scary. It really is. I mean, right now, Max is driving better than he was last season. I mean, I'll go out on a record and say this. If this Max Verstappen was driving in 2021, we wouldn't have gone to Abu Dhabi. The championship would have... I know we say the championship should have been won before that, but he wouldn't have even gone that far. And you could argue to a degree that perhaps Max has not been put in that sort of jeopardy situation that Lewis put him in last season. He hasn't had that, so we don't know how Max would continue to react in those situations. That's something we'll obviously hopefully see next season. But I just look at what he's doing right now and I just feel like everything has to go right for his opponent to win a Grand Prix. He's just driving that well. It's literally almost as good as prime Sir Lewis Hamilton at this point. He's literally almost at that level at the moment. Maybe he is on that level. I don't know. It depends on who you ask, really. Lee, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, firstly, I definitely think he will reach the percentage ratio that you mentioned. Fully see him in the next 2 races, but on level quality, he's definitely has improved over last year. But I do also agree with the caveat of he's not had the amount of pressure that he was under last season. So pressure does breed mistakes. It does breed the competitive streak that we saw in Max last season. He hasn't had to do any of that gung-ho attacking or defending that Max is known for doing. He's been quite clean driving. So it's very hard to see right now if in regards to clean driving and clean overtaking, if that's been an improvement or it's just the lack of the competitive championship that's made it easy for him not to take those risks. Which last season he had to take those risks because he needed every point he could get. But the quality of the drive and the tyre life management has completely improved. And you think it was very much Verstappen back a few years ago where Max was crashing every time. You put those two drivers side by side and you couldn't even say they're the same person. It's completely mind-blowing how much Max has grown as a driver since the Verstappen days.
Yeah, I've never known a driver to also have so many negative nicknames thrown his way. I mean, not to disrespect Max Verstappen or anything.
I wasn't trying to disrespect him.
Not you.
Mercedes fan, careful. Careful.
The Ferrari fan's going to take the heat on this one, so you guys are all right on that one. We'll just send all the hate comments my way and just say I'm mid or rubbish, whatever you want.
You're salty because Ferrari threw it away halfway through the season.
I know, and it's not Ferrari's fault. It's because of Red Bull. Darn them. Yeah, all of that. But we try to be funny on this show, but no, I've never understood how it always amazes me with social media. Like loads of things amaze me with social media, but it's just the creativity of some people to come up with some silly names for certain drivers. And obviously Max is like Crashstappen, Capstappen, and just to name a few, for example, they have been quite fun. So I do want to test people to see if they can come up with other nicknames of some other drivers. Obviously, to try and make like puns with their names or stuff like that. Obviously within reason. I'm sure.
Make them nice, not
Yeah, no, obviously
the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, I mean, Goatifi is obviously a good one. We're gonna have to try and get as much use out of that one as we can because obviously 2023, if things go the way that they should do, Williams will be having a different driver lineup next season. And poor Goatifi won't be a part of that. But no, it just, on serious note with Max Verstappen, as I said already, it just amazes me how much in control he is of these situations. His tyre management is phenomenal. I think that has probably been the biggest improvement to his driving. I wouldn't say that was ever a weakness for Max Verstappen, but I feel like sometimes he's always had a problem with trying to manage his pace out from what he can do and managing the tyres. It's like he had to be coached into making sure that he wasn't leaving any time on the table but not wearing his tyres before they were ready. Now, it just gets to a point where you're kind of second-guessing on strategy. Maybe that's what Mercedes have got a problem with Verstappen. They just second-guess on strategy because they just don't know what's happening with him.
Can I just add on, though, like moving forward? So, also, we've had so much talk about the Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen battles. Like, Lewis has probably got, another 2-3 years in him. Once he goes, like, this is what I mean, like, looking into the future, the only two drivers right now, maybe three, there are only two, maybe three drivers that I look at that could possibly challenge Max throughout the rest of their generation. And I think the main one's Charles Leclerc. Like, Charles Leclerc started with so much promise, but he does still seem to have a lot of mistakes in him. But it seems that Max has sort of polished the mistakes in his game compared to Charles Leclerc. Leclerc seems still to be quite an emotive driver, but the pace is there, the potential's there. George Russell, I think George Russell has potential. I think Lando Norris has a great amount of potential, but I don't think he's in the car right now to show that. But we need the likes. I think Charles Leclerc's the one to look at in particular, and like for neutral F1 fans, to really give us some great battles that we're going to remember. If you have a look through the great rivalries that we've seen in the past, I think right now, if Mercedes are still on that level and Lewis tails off, Max isn't going to have a proper rival for years to come. So we really need the likes of Charles Leclerc in particular, George Russell, maybe Lando Norris, to up their game, to give us some great races and battles to talk about in the future.
I thought you also forgot Fernando.
I was just thinking that.
I love a Fernando-Max championship fight. That'd be interesting.
Well, you never know. In 10 years' time, when Fernando's still racing and signs another multi-year deal with Aston Martin, you never ever know with Fernando Alonso.
I swear Alonso and Max have a bit of a what's the nicest way of putting it? They have a lot of love for each other.
Yeah,
they have a lot of love for each other. So it'd be interesting to see how that dynamic would change.
But they've never really locked horns on the track before, have they? Well, I mean, I can't think of a scenario where them two have actually raced each other. I mean, perhaps Hungary last year. Which one's that?
I think they remember the only moment, the sort of most memorable moment between them two was the GP2 engines comment, which is ironic because he was getting overtaken by Max Verstappen, who then went on to win 2 world championships with a Honda engine. Oh,
yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, there'll probably be a little bit of jeopardy there if there's a Honda Christmas party for somehow Fernando finds himself there. And maybe it's the entertainment, I don't know. But maybe they'll have a bit of a disagreement on that one. But yeah, that would be fun. I would love to see them two lock horns with each other, but it's never really happened. We always see Fernando seem to find his way with Sir Lewis. They always seem, this year they have done that quite a lot, them two. And we haven't seen that with Max before. Lando Norris, I do want to mention him, and we'll move on to McLaren in a minute. But Christian Horner, in an interview with motorsport.com, mentioned that he'd actually spoken to Lando Norris quite a few times about a possible F1 seat with Red Bull. This was before he'd signed that multi-year deal with McLaren early in the season. Now, Lando's a guy that we all love on this show, and we think he's a fantastic talent, one of the guys of the future. But what seems to be lacking for him is a car capable of challenging for race wins and maybe even world championships by extension. We've seen George Russell thrusted into that position to some degree, and he's doing rather well. We're now waiting for Lando to join the party on a more regular basis. What would you say to the prospect of a Lando Norris-Max Verstappen partnership at Red Bull? Would that work? Would that be the next generation of Hamilton-Rosberg, maybe?
No. Lando wouldn't get a chance whatsoever. I think he'd end up being another Gasly and Albon jobby, to be honest.
Ooh.
That is Max Verstappen's... Look, I'm not denying Lando's talent at all. I think Lando can be a world champion, 100%. But Red Bull is very much Max Verstappen's team. I think a driver like Sergio Perez, who is, for me, he's a B-grade driver, he's perfect for Max Verstappen. If you used to put someone like Lando Norris, who could prove to be some kind of challenge over the course of a season, I just don't think he'd be given a chance. So I don't think a move to Red Bull would be good for Lando. I think maybe a move to Mercedes when Lewis is to retire, I think that would probably be the best move if Mercedes are still up there. But yeah, I think right now, Red Bull is not the place to go to if you want to win a world championship, because look, obviously Max is the guy to beat already, but he's also very much a golden child at Red Bull. So I just think if Lando was to go to Red Bull, I just think he'd become quite submissive, and I don't think the move would work at all.
Well, I mean, if you think about the situation with Sir Lewis and Mercedes, I mean, Sir Lewis probably will sign a multi-year deal at some point, and that will keep him around for a few more years. How long would Lando Norris be prepared to wait for an opportunity like that to come up? Ferrari right now, I can't really see a scenario where Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz are not there for a few more years at least. So there's not really an opportunity there, in my opinion, unless something crazy happens. I feel like Red Bull right now is a fairly realistic option. I know you mentioned it's Max Verstappen's team. He's the golden child. We said the same thing about Sebastian Vettel before Danny Ricciardo came in. And, you know, it's similar hallmarks of what happened at Mercedes, you know, years ago when Rosberg was leading that team. And, you know, he had a decline in Michael Schumacher in that, to be fair. But it did seem for all the while that team was going to be pushing Rosberg to see how far he can go. Then they brought Sir Lewis in. Okay, I'm really clutching at straws here to find parallels in this situation because it's a different kind. It was Sir Lewis Hamilton was one of the best drivers in the sport at the elite level compared to Lando Norris coming into a team that already has the elite level there. But I just feel like if Red Bull are entertaining this option, they have to look post-Perez. I think the friendship between Verstappen and Norris would allow a partnership to happen, which would obviously have to be tested over the course of time. As long as Norris is there, I can't see a scenario where Norris would happily sit there as the number two. So maybe it's one that I want more to happen than it's likely, but I just think that would be quite fun to see how those two would really get on when they're in direct combat with each other. And let's be honest, I think it's probably the most realistic option for Norris over the next few years. What do you reckon, Lee?
I don't think that's very likely, although I agree with your logic. I think it's probably a lot more likely that Alex Albon will end up in a Red Bull post Sergio Perez, whenever that is, and that's mainly down to obviously the now tyre ownership. Well, it was always the majority tyre ownership, but as Detach is no longer with us, they're going to be the obviously the bigger voice now, and have tyre ownership and having a tyre driver in a championship winning team in a championship winning car. I think that's very much likely what they're going to be wanting to see for Alex in the future. And I think that's the only possible candidate for any new Red Bull seat once Sergio does hang up his boots.
It feels like the safe option. And I like Alex Albon. And I really do think that he's driving better now than he was a few years ago. And I do rate him quite highly. I just think Alex is the safe option.
He is indeed the safe option.
No, but this is it.
That's what I think will happen because of the ownership.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. I would say if you're going to pick someone right now who you think is going to replace Perez, and I don't think Perez is going anywhere anytime soon. He's second in the championship. He's doing all right. He's won a few races this year, and he's driving a lot better now than he was a few races ago when he was struggling outside in the top 6. So I do think that Alex Albon is a driver that Red Bull would probably be happy to bring back, and I think he's certainly earned an opportunity. Hopefully, he'll continue to thrive next season, although it's going to be quite difficult for him with the machinery that he has. But I just feel that if Norris is available and he wants to come, I think it's the move Red Bull have got to do. It's all fine and well having Max Verstappen there and cashing in on, the superstar that he is, the generational talent, arguably going to go down as one of the greatest of all time. He's already racking up the records right now and getting so many race wins and is obviously won a few world championships. But you do have to worry about future preservation. And with Red Bull, whilst there's not much of an age gap between the two of them, it's only like a couple of years. It's how long Max Verstappen's been in this sport. It's only a few years between the two of them. But Norris is definitely the guy. If I was Christian Horner, that's the guy that I would want in my team alongside Max Verstappen. And at the very least, maybe we end up with a scenario where it ends up like Rosberg and Hamilton, and that would be really fun to see between them two. And obviously Red Bull would not want other drivers and other teams to get involved in this sort of thing because they'd want to have it all to themselves. But I don't know, I just got this feeling that that's what they really want. They don't want Max to get too comfortable. They want to make sure that they have the best version of himself. And the only way you're going to do that is by having the competition to push him in the same way that we had with Rosberg and Hamilton. Like, I'll go on record as saying, if it wasn't for those 3 or 4 years with Rosberg in that team pushing Sir Lewis to the levels that he had to go to win, Lewis won 3 out of the 4 battles between them, I don't think Sir Lewis Hamilton would end up being as good as he is now.
I agree.
You need that. So that's kind of my logic. Maybe it's wishful thinking, and perhaps I hope people will agree with me in the comments that they want to see, but I just feel like it's a move that if Lando Norris is going to be that guy that's going to challenge for world championships, I think Red Bull is the outright option for him. He's got to go in there, in the lion's den, no pun intended, and go in there and try and take it on. I'd love to see it. McLaren v Alpine. We've got to talk about this weekend. We've already had a lot to say about McLaren. Ricciardo, mixed bag, depending on who you ask and how he did in Mexico. Hopefully he can take the good parts of that race and try and do something similar in Brazil. Not take Tsunoda out, mind you, but, the other parts in that. It's brought that battle between the two teams back into contention now. Alpine's reliability has been a big factor as well. So between these two teams, what do you think is going to come down to out of the two of them that's going to get the outright win in the constructors between the two of them?
Alpine reliability.
Yeah. I can't really disagree with that one. I mean, Fernando Alonso this season was...
let me rephrase that. Fernando's reliability.
Yeah, Fernando...
Esteban's fine.
I was going to say, yeah, Fernando's reliability. 6 retirements through reliability issues. I mean, I say 6, it's been 5, but there was that Austria race, sprint race, where he didn't even start because of the electrical issues. Fernando himself has gone on record saying that he's lost, 66 points he reckons he's lost this season, to a point that would put him comfortably in P7 in the Drivers' Championship, and it would take the Constructors' battle out of the question between McLaren and Alpine. So, I mean, what do you think has gone wrong with Alpine's reliability? I mean, I reckon they've done a Ferrari here. They've pushed so hard on performance with their new power unit. Yeah. They did go down the same route as what Mercedes did with the split turbo, like Honda have as well. They went different direction to Ferrari to chase performance. But like Ferrari, they've pushed so much on performance that they have hindered their reliability for this season, something that they'll obviously hope to improve over the next few years whilst we have this engine freeze on performance. So it could be the factor that cost them the P4 and the constructors this year.
Yeah, I think particularly going into Brazil, where altitude's going to be a factor. Obviously, not as much of a factor as it was in Mexico City. You've seen it. You saw with the Ferraris, they had to turn their power down in Mexico, and obviously Alonso, himself was a victim of it. So you won't rule out again. If you saw Alonso going out due to reliability issues, you wouldn't be surprised at all. I think another thing to factor in is that surely you'd like to think that Dan Ricciardo would be buoyant after the performance that he put in Mexico City, barring the incident with Tsunoda. Do you think he'd want to be carrying that confidence? We know how confident Daniel Ricciardo is a fantastic racer. He goes for those bold overtakes, and he might be hungry. He might finally have some hunger that he's been lacking over the last season or so. So if only the Alpine reliability be a factor, I think also some hunger from Daniel Ricciardo. And we all know that given any opportunity, Lando Norris, he'll bring the points home. So I think they've got a steady head in Lando Norris, but it'd be a bonus for them if they have Daniel Ricciardo in the mix like they did last week.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And it was nice to see Daniel feeling a bit more confident. I think there was an overtake that he made. I don't know if you guys saw this. He was driving down the back straight and he was almost making his hand out to like a gun and sort of like shooting the driver in front, and then made the overtake. I can't remember who it was. If it was one of the, if it was Gasly or someone else, but he did that. And I thought, that's the old Daniel Ricciardo. That's the driver that is enjoying himself. Granted, he's admittedly said on record that he's not going to be driving next season. We know he's not going to be driving next season. Hopefully something will come through for 2024. We know it's quite difficult to sort of make those predictions and arrangements. We have seen in recent years that that's come to fruition, but it did feel that Daniel, despite being shafted on strategy, it must be said, McLaren have always put him on the unfavourable strategy when they've split them. At this occasion, it actually came to him. Norris ended up going on the Mercedes strategy and it didn't work out for him, but Ricciardo, it did. So it's always a good thing going into this weekend. His qualifying form has been a little bit better. He's been closer to Norris. That's something Alpine are going to have to worry about. Ocon has been very quick to rubbish this reliability concern, but there's no denying with Fernando that Fernando is driving supremely well right now. Probably the best driver outside the top six at the moment. Him and Norris quite close between the two of them. But that's 3 retirements through reliability in the last 7 races since the summer break. I mean, if that's not a cause for concern, then I don't know what is right now. I mean, it's not good for Alpine. And for me, I think the one factor that's going to stop them from getting P4 is reliability. Or Fernando's reliability, that is. Because Ocon, he did okay, but he's not driving on Fernando's level right now.
Oh, no, he's completely not. Fernando is, as always, racing as possessed. And it's just, he gets every point he can get out of his car, and it's something that Fernando's always been good at doing. But Esteban, as much as Esteban likes to think he's on Fernando's par, he's not.
No. I'm to be honest, it's one of those, I don't really look out for Ocon in races at the moment. I mean, I like the guy. I think he's a good driver, but the X factor in that team is coming from Fernando's side of the garage, expectedly, and it's something that Alpine are definitely going to have to try and find when they have Ocon and Gasly together next season. Speaking of Gasly, I think we should focus on him a little bit. He's been quite busy this season, hasn't he? He's been on the naughty step a few times this year. He's quite perilously close to a race ban at the moment. He's 2 penalty points away from that. Just racking them up for this season. He got 2 points in Spain, 3 penalty points in Austria, 2 penalty points in Japan, 2 penalty points in America, and 1 in Mexico. So 5 penalty points in the last 3 Grand Prix. I mean, if he goes on that form, he's probably going to miss the last race of the season right now. And whilst AlphaTauri are fighting Haas for P8 in the Constructors' Championship, something that they wouldn't necessarily have been hoping for at the start of the season, is a crazy idea. What's the odds of Gasly getting penalty points before the final race of the season so that it wipes the slate clean by the time he goes to Alpine next year?
Well, if you're going to have a wet race again, and, obviously when the AlphaTauri starts, they're going to be right in the mix. You might do something iffy at the beginning, and you never know. But yeah, he hasn't been quite himself this season. Yeah, I think he's probably been disappointed with the performance of the AlphaTauri. I think a lot of drivers come into 2022 with a sense of optimism. It's a new start, it's a new opportunity. So obviously, if things kind of go backwards for the team, it's going to be frustrating. And obviously, he took the move to Alpine, so he wasn't happy with the situation at AlphaTauri. And I think sometimes that frustration, he's sort of showing it on track. And if he wants to be doing well at Alpine up against a fellow Frenchman who he has a bit of history with, he can't be like that, or things are going to quickly go sour between them.
Yeah, this is it. And I think erratic has probably been the best way to describe not just him, but Tsunoda as well. I mean, I think Tsunoda as a whole has probably driven a little bit better than Gasly this season, although Gasly has more points than him. Tsunoda, surprisingly, has the second most penalty points behind his teammate this season. So the AlphaTauri boys have been quite naughty this year. On that list of penalty, I'm just looking in front of me. Can you guys guess which of the two drivers on the grid right now do not currently have any penalty points?
Oh, good question. Zhou, I reckon Zhou's a good boy.
No, he's got some points. Not many, mind you, but he has got a few.
Max Verstappen.
No, Max has actually kept his nose clean this year, but he's obviously got points that have carried over from
I just wondered if they'd gone off yet or not. That was the
No, I'm just going to quickly check the list now because I'm looking. No, Max has still got a few more in there. He's still got a few more, but as I said, they carried over from last season.
Kevin Magnussen.
No, he's actually got a few as well. For the benefit of people in the comments, do let me know what you think it is before you get to this point. But the two drivers with no penalty points this year, Carlos Sainz and Sir Lewis Hamilton.
Whoa.
Yeah, so they've been very good boys this year. Very, very good boys, all things considered.
Carlos Sainz has often been the victim. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. That is true. Yeah, Carlos has been the guy that's been punted off, yeah.
Well, I do want to also add with the 10 points, I think the last two drivers that got up to 10 points obviously never had a race ban was obviously Roman Grosjean and Max Verstappen. So I think you get that close and drivers have to, they just tidy up because they can't risk that race ban.
Well, this is it, isn't it? Because AlphaTauri certainly won't want Gasly getting a race ban for Abu Dhabi. I don't think they'd mind if Gasly got penalty points at the last race of the season so that it carries over into next year and he has a race ban when he goes to Alpine. It's kind of that, it's both teams are kind of sweating on this, isn't it? Because you feel like, would Alpine, I don't know if they can or not, but would someone have a quiet word in his ear saying, you know what, Pierre, we wouldn't mind so much if you had a little drive into someone into turn one, to make it not suspicious. You can make it a Haas if you like, because that's probably where they'll qualify around that area. But it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you cleaned your slate by the time we go to the first race of the season in a brand new car. AlphaTauri, on the other hand, probably hoping that he doesn't, because then those penalty points will carry over into next season. I mean, he's going to have at least 10 penalty points up until the Spanish Grand Prix. So he's really treading on thin ice at the moment.
I'm sure that discussion's been had in private somewhere on both sides with Pierre. Obviously, I wouldn't be happy if he acts on in malicious intent of crashing.
Yeah, I just keep thinking of that Roy Keane meme. You know, the one that Courtney probably remember the one where he goes, "Oh, you know what? I just want to go and smash into someone." We'll see. And interesting thought. Let me know, guys. Will Pierre Gasly, quick vote in the comments section if you're watching this on YouTube, will Pierre Gasly receive a race ban before the end of the season? Obviously, 2 races to go. If he gets 2 more penalty points this weekend, he will miss the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and have an early winter break, which isn't the worst thing. You might fancy watching the World Cup as that goes on at the same time. So we shall see. Not implying that he will, but we shall see. Quick note on Ferrari. We talked about this earlier in the episode with Alpine and their reliability issues. There is a concern for Ferrari at the moment because right now they're 40 points ahead of Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship. Charles Leclerc is fighting for P2 in the Drivers' Championship. He's currently P3 behind Perez. And one thing that we learned from Ferrari at the Mexican Grand Prix while they were so far off the pace was the fact they had to run their engines at a much lower setting. Because of the high altitude, their turbo, which is a lot smaller this year, which has given them that boost in acceleration and traction, something that has been quite hallmarked as a big success for them this season. It's also proven to be quite difficult at races like this. Now, whilst Brazil is nowhere near as high in altitude as Mexico, it's around about a little bit higher than what we saw in Austria. And if you cast your minds back to the Austrian Grand Prix, Carlos Sainz's engine literally melted as it was on fire, owing to an issue with the turbo that Ferrari hadn't actually learned until that point. It almost ended Charles Leclerc's race when they were running 1-2 in that Grand Prix as well, if you remember. He limped over the line. All right, he had a throttle issue, but he limped over the line just ahead of Max, and probably a part of that was because they had to turn the engine down to make sure he got there. Ferrari mentioned in Mexico quite emphatically that they said that they have to lower their engine limits to make sure that they finish the race. Not necessarily finish the race in the points, just finish the race. Brazil being a little bit higher in altitude than Austria, there is a concern that Ferrari may have a similar problem this weekend, which may hinder their pace. It could provide an opportunity for Mercedes to gain more ground heading into the final race of the season. So, what are your thoughts on Ferrari going into this race? Is this starting to become a bit of a problem for them, where they might have to limp over the line this year?
Yeah, I think they'll definitely be trying to avoid any kind of accidents, the way that Carlos Sainz obviously been punted off a couple of times this season. I think Ferrari would very, very much be in a conservative mode, sort of get the season over the line. But then again, like we've mentioned this whole debate over, I think like in terms of for saving face, they'd like to finish second. But I'm wondering if, finishing third isn't the end of the world, given that you're given more development time for 2023. So I know they would like to get it over the line, but I just imagine they will be going particularly conservative. I don't think we'll be seeing any bold moves from either of their drivers. I think they'll be trying to keep themselves out of trouble. They probably will turn the engine down to a degree. But yeah, I just expect them to be on their best behaviour this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the championship where there's obviously the advantage in the ATR regs of having a bit more development time. I suppose all that going on with Ferrari and Mercedes, whilst they're both saying they want to fight and finish P2, we've almost got a metaphorical equivalent of Charles and Max at Jeddah earlier this season, where they were tippy-toeing against each other to try and not be the first one over the DRS line to get the run into turn one. It's a bit like that with Ferrari and Mercedes. It's almost, whilst they're not admitting it, you almost feel there's this inevitability about it where neither of them really want P2 because it will hinder them for next season.
Yeah. You just imagine, I know we're not at the preview there, but it'd be like, oh, box, we need to retire the car, and then that's Mercedes, and then Ferrari, like, box, we need to retire, and they just retire both their cars.
You can end up in opposite situation, wouldn't you? You could end up with a crash gate scenario in Abu Dhabi, or maybe Latifi has another crash in Abu Dhabi, brings out the safety car, and all of a sudden, you got Lewis Hamilton on the soft tyres against Charles Leclerc on the old hards, and you got Binotto saying it's not right, and it's like, and then you got Toto Wolff like, no, don't do it, we need this for next year, stay third, Lewis, stay third. Assuming that Max wins the race, obviously, of course, because why wouldn't he? But yeah, so it's going to be an interesting one with Ferrari. I think the wet weather might actually come to their favour if it cools the cars down a little bit. But it's hard to tell. I mean, Ferrari do have a big lead, but I certainly wouldn't rule out Mercedes overhauling that in the last few races or just nipping them to the post. So we'll have to see. If Ferrari are really going to get on top of things next season, engine reliability has to be up there. And they still feel like they haven't figured out how to sort this, really. So it could be a huge flaw in their design, which could hinder them for a little while longer. So, it's all going off down there right now. I want to move on to a few more fun things. We saw a demonstration from Mercedes and Red Bull in Vegas a few days ago. Obviously, teasing next season's race in Las Vegas on the streets. There was a few demo runs. We saw a Red Bull going through the casino. I don't know if you guys saw that on social media. That was quite cool. I can imagine trying to extend track limits there, and people say, why do we have more races at Monaco? We can just do it in the casino in Vegas. We also had Sir Lewis Hamilton and George Russell do some demo runs, interestingly, with some neon lighting on the underfloors of the Mercedes. Those look pretty cool. What did you reckon about those, guys? Do you want to see those on all the cars in Vegas next year?
Yeah, bring them in the night races, particularly if you can have races. Yeah, because particularly if you're going to have the races at the front sort of been pretty much decided from the start, I might as well give us sort of more visual entertainment by some neon lights. So why not? We're always talking about adding to the spectacle, so I don't think there'd be any harm in it, to be honest.
Yeah, they're quite cool. I wouldn't mind seeing that, to be honest. It'd be a nice little change of pace. I know someone's inevitably going to come in the comments saying, oh, well, they can't really do that because where's it going to drain? The power's going to drain from. And I just feel like,
Well, you also got the weight limit. You just add extra ballast, neon lights.
That's it. That's it. You'll just see them all at the front of the car for cars that have a dodgy front end. Well, I mean, I'm not pretending I know how the ballast works in order to get that proper weight distribution, but it is an important point, how teams would adopt stuff like that for a one-off race. But
it would also affect the floor. You think of on the floor edging and the air going out. If you've got some neon, even if it's a millimeter affecting the floor, it's going to affect the airflow. In race conditions, it probably won't ever work. But yeah, it's still nice.
I mean, if poor old Adrian knew, if he still had hair, he'd be pulling it out at the sight of neon lights underneath the floor that he's worked so hard on to try and put together to turn Red Bull into what they are today. So I'd love to see it. I think it'd be quite cool, but I don't think we're going to see anything like that. It's just part of a little bit of a show, really. I know Crofty was teasing there at the idea of Sir Lewis Hamilton, if he's going to stay on for a few more years. I'm pretty convinced that he will do. I can't see any reason why he wouldn't. All the signs seem to be that he will. We'll just have to wait for confirmation to see what happens. Sebastian Vettel was talking about retirement in an interview this week. I can't remember the publication. I do apologise. I can't quote it because I forgot what it was. Whilst he doesn't rule out an F1 return from a physical perspective, he seems to be more inclined to detach himself from the sport. He feels like there's an element of wanting to come back, but he would rather, not to a point, he'd rather not even watch the races. He wants to completely detach himself from the sport and move on to other things. I can only put this down to one thing and one thing only, and that's the fact that he set up a social media account and it's already driven him away from the sport after literally a few posts. Totally understandable, Seb. Yeah. Completely with you on that one. Social media would drive you away. He's only had a social media account for a few months, and that was just to announce his retirement and his Netflix documentary. So, I mean, what do you think about that, guys? About Seb's comments? Detaching yourself from a sport like F1, a sport that's been a part of his life, or motorsport's been part of his life for, well, since he could walk, I guess.
Yeah, but I think it makes complete sense because it's been clear in his performances, particularly towards the end of his time at Ferrari, that he's kind of lost a passion for it. And I think he wants to have a passion for F1 because, look, as you said, it's been his life. So I'm wondering if he just was to take himself away, completely cut off. It's a bit like having, a proper holiday. When you're off holiday from work, you don't want to know what's going on at work because you're supposed to be on a break. So I'm just wondering if he wants to have a complete mental, refresh himself.
He wants to have F1 rehab.
And then see how he... Yeah, pretty much. I think in this day and age, particularly after 2021, I think we all need a bit of that.
Yeah. We're still getting flashbacks of those days, wake up in a cold sweat and all that. No, I totally get it. And it's a shame because I feel like there is a role in F1 for Seb. I mean, he's driving phenomenally well, but hopefully he doesn't completely switch off from F1 altogether and he keeps an eye on stuff and maybe we'll see him again one day. It just makes you feel old watching his entire career and that now it's over and after so much success and so many happy days and hoping for him to be the second coming of Schumacher, and he never really materialised into a world championship. But it's going to be a sad loss from the sport. I heard that his final crash helmet for the season, he's going to be offering out bids to people that want to be on his crash helmet. I don't know how they're going to manage that, but obviously to help fund charitable workings for some environmental causes and stuff that he's been involved with. And it just literally sums Seb up as a person, really. I couldn't think of him doing anything different. So, quite interesting interview for him. I definitely applaud. I really wish I could remember what the source was. I do apologise, but if you guys come across it, do let me know what you think. Last thing before we get into the predictions, obviously the big story about the driver transfer that hasn't been confirmed yet is the rumours regarding who is going to be driving in the second Haas next year alongside Kevin Magnussen. Now, right now, as we understand, it's between Mick Schumacher and Nico Hülkenberg. Sources at Ziggo Sports based in Holland have been saying that Haas are going to announce their second driver on Thursday. So at the time of this podcast coming out, you guys will probably know who that is. Or maybe not, depending on if they haven't. Hülkenberg versus Schumacher. right now, guys, if I was to ask you to pick a name who you think it's going to be and why, who's it going to be? Hulk or Schumacher?
I think it's going to be Hulkenberg. We discussed it before. I think it's the case of him being a more reliable driver. Mick Schumacher seems to have an accident in him. But it's harsh on Mick, but we know how harsh F1 can be. So it does seem that it seems to be heading in the direction of Nico Hulkenberg right now.
What about you, Lee?
Yeah, I agree. It's the Hulk. He's coming back. He wants to get that podium. He's coming back. That's it. The safe set of hands. He won't crash. He won't cost the team money. We won't get any more snippets on Drive to Survive with Gene Haas shouting at Gunther down the phone for why they're spending loads of money on repairing cars. That's it. They're going to be a reliable, well-funded team of not spending money on repairs. That's it.
Well, I mean, I heard they're going to have more money to spend next year, so they might be able to meet the budget cap because there are some new sponsorship deals coming in. So, in a way, you could make an argument that perhaps if you want to pick the driver that I think is going to be faster or has the more potential to improve, you might be able to cover the cost of Mick Schumacher's repair bills. And I know we joke about this, but I just feel that with Hulkenberg, yes, you get a driver that's experienced. Yes, you get a driver that could get up to speed relatively quickly and be quite solid for you. But for Haas, I don't know. I'm just trying to get my head around a team of Hulkenberg and Magnussen. I keep thinking back to Hungary a few years back when they were arguing and Kevin Magnussen basically told him to, well, you don't have to repeat the quote. I think those of you that listen know what I'm talking about here. We try to keep this podcast clean. You know, so the dirty-minded will know what I'm talking about. But I don't know. I just can't see it working. Maybe this is my Schumacher fanboy coming out, but I just feel that Haas, they haven't managed this Mick Schumacher situation well either. I really feel that the stern toughness of Gunther Steiner, whilst admirable, is probably not the right way to manage Mick Schumacher. I think it needs more the arm around him, something that a few other team bosses might be better adept at providing, and perhaps something that, you know, AlphaTauri in the future might be looking at someone like him, or perhaps any other team that's looking for a free agent in due course. So we'll have to wait and see. But I do worry for Mick.
The one thing I do agree with you about the driver pairing, if it is Kevin and Nico, is the team briefings are probably going to sound like an episode of South Park between the two drivers.
Oh, I'd love to see that though, wouldn't you? That's what Drive to Survive. If they do another series, they need to focus on Haas just for a few. You know when they did it before, the half of the episodes were about Grosjean and Magnussen and Haas, the dynamic there. They need to bring that back with Hulkenberg and see how that all goes down. I can really... Because I can't imagine Hulkenberg being there just to fill a seat. I think he'd be there to try and you know, take control, or as best as he can. So that could get quite feisty between those two. But let us know what you think, guys, in the comment section. Final part of the episode. As always, for those of you that follow this show, we do our predictions. So guys, same as always, top 3 predictions for the main race, not the sprint race, but the main race. And can you give me a bold prediction this weekend? Lee, I'm going to let you go first.
For me, I think it's going to be Max, Lewis, Sergio. And the bold prediction is we're going to have a nice red flag for 2 hours while they wait for the track to dry up.
This podcast is going to be out on Tuesday because it's going to take that long to finish the race because of the red flags.
Yeah, it's going to be a red flag, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see half points.
Yeah, could do. Courtney, what about you?
I'm going to completely copy Lee. Max first, Lewis second, and Checo third. I'm going to say a top 5 finish for Lando Norris.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with both of you on the top 3. In terms of Max, Lewis and Checo. My bold prediction is that we're going to have a dry race on Sunday.
Ooh. Completely undo my bold prediction.
Yeah, it's just going to undo everything. We'll just go completely.
One of us will be wrong, Adam.
It's probably going to be me, but this has been with weather forecast. We always anticipate rain for a lot of races. Admittedly, it's been a little bit better. But in the past, we always say, it's going to be a wet race every weekend, and then it's not. It's like, oh, well, you know, what do you do? So, yeah, I'm just going to throw that one out there. Why not? But, guys, that's all we've had time for. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Apologies sometimes if it has lagged a little bit in terms of the audio quality or visual issues. We are trying to sort that. It's mostly my fault. So, you know, if you want to lay blame somewhere, it's in my direction on that one. But hopefully we'll have that sorted out soon. In the meantime, though, if you want to support us, you can do so by subscribing to the channel on YouTube and liking the video to let YouTube know that you like what you're seeing and that more lovely people like yourself should get to check out our show as well if they haven't done so already. If you're following us on your favourite podcasting platform and you want to shout out on a future episode, you can do so by giving us a 5-star review. Just remember, as always on Spotify, you need to let us know on our socials if you have done so. Send us a screenshot on our Instagram or Twitter page and we'll give you a shout out for that. Also on your Apple Podcast, if you listen to it on there, or Amazon Music, 5-star review on there, we'll give you a shout out in the next episode. But until then, guys, please stay safe. Hope you enjoy the Brazilian Grand Prix, the Sprint Brazilian Grand Prix weekend. So qualifying is going to be on the Friday with the sprint race on Saturday, the main race on Sunday. Till then, take care. Thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.